Hey everyone, Brandon with Flyin Miata back for another FM Live. Today we're going to talk about emissions, why we care, what the process is like, and what it means to you. Now at FM we've been doing emissions approval for many years. All of our turbo kits have approvals, some other parts as well. So we've been doing this for a while, and things have changed and gotten more complicated and expensive and so on and so forth. But we're going to talk about the what, the how, and the why, basically. Now, as always, if you have questions, drop them in the comments. We will try to get to them live. If not, we will get to them after the fact. I will preface this, we are not necessarily experts with every single aspect of the emissions approval process, but we will try to answer your questions to the best of our ability, or just say, that's beyond us. As always, you like this thing, at the end, let us prove ourselves first. Drop us a like if you want to see more of it, subscribe, and if you have your own experiences, drop a comment, let us know. And finally, if you don't like vertical videos, we have a horizontal 4K video tomorrow, so just stay tuned and you can watch it on your TV instead of your phone. So, emissions, why do we care? So aside from the obvious, the clean air thing, we also want to make sure that our products are available to as many people as possible in as many different situations as possible. So now if you have something that affects the emissions of your car, let me rephrase, if you have something that affects an emissions part of your car and it's not specifically approved, then it is most likely illegal everywhere, regardless of whether it's inspected or not, regardless of whether you live in commie California or anything, it's illegal. So you want to make sure that everything is approved, everything is legal. That means that you don't have to worry about inspections if you have them now. Means you also don't have to worry about inspections if you have them in the future. And it also means that you don't have to worry about a big headache or some legal repercussions or anything like that about selling your car later if it's not in an emissions compliant state, like condition. So that is why we do it. So how we do it by working with CARB, the California Air Resources Board, and also SEMA, the Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association. So CARB is the only way that you can get an actual official approval saying this part has been approved and is legal for sale. Now, you can go about it for non-CARB states, which at the moment is everywhere except for California and kind of Colorado. So you can do what's called a SEMA certified. So SEMA certified is a lot of the similar tests. It's beneficial because it's much faster than a full SEMA approval, or excuse me, full CARB approval. So if you recall, with the NC Turbo, our first batch were not CARB approved. That at that point, they were SEMA certified. So basically we did that so that we could start selling them as quickly as possible because we still had months to wait for the actual paperwork of the CARB approval. So we were able to sell them under SEMA certified much more quickly. Now what is SEMA certified? SEMA certified is effectively a legal basis as proof that we are not increasing the emissions of this car, that this car will still satisfy the same emissions categories that it was certified under as a brand new automobile. SEMA certified is not actually an approval that says we have tested it, we have the authority to say it's okay, it is okay. It's more of a, if government comes in and says, why is this, why are you doing this, you shouldn't be doing this, we can show them all the test results and all of the stuff that we have to say, no, really, we still satisfy all of the same requirements as before. So that said, because California is a gigantic market and there are more and more states adopting more and more of their standards, we really want the CARB approval. That means that there's no question. We won't even have a question of a government entity coming to us and saying, is this legal? Because they'll see the EO and they'll say, yep, it's legal. You're good to go. As long as you're still abiding by everything that's written in that EO. So we pursue that. Again, CARB is the only one that can actually provide a legitimate approval for it. So we go to CARB to get an EO, or an executive order, and that is the legal document, the approval that what we have is legal. So we're not going to make this political. There's no need for that. There's plenty of that to start off with. And CARB, frankly, gets a lot of flack. But basically, what CARB is doing is just saying, when you bought this car, it was this clean. We don't really care, generally, what you do to it, but we want to make sure that it's just as clean as it was when it rolled off the factory floor. So while the specific things that you have to do to prove that may change and have gotten a bit more complicated in the recent years, they're not changing the standards. It's not saying the car has to be as clean as a car that's sold today. Nope, it has to be as clean as it was when it rolled off the factory line. So they are defining the process for that. They have an official certification that they provide for that, and there's kind of a roadmap to follow. So having worked with CARB, pros and cons, but I do not think that they're the devil, and I do think they're just trying to keep everything as it was to start off with. They're not saying you can't increase the horsepower by X%. I don't care. It can be a bazillion horsepower as long as it doesn't increase the emissions beyond what it was to start off with. So along those lines, almost anything can be made legal for sale in California. There is an asterisk on that. You have to go through the certification process, and it cannot be anything that is adjustable. And there are some other detail-y things. So generally speaking, as long as you can't program it and tune it, and you prove that it is clean, you can make it legal for sale in California. You just have to go through all the things to prove that the emissions have not increased. And again, more and more states are adopting those standards. Let's see, Maine, New York, and Colorado now have different variations of year-range adoptions of the CARB, catalytic converter standards, which are quite a bit more stringent than the EPA standards, so you have to pay attention to that. And then in Colorado now, specific and frankly a slightly more logical list of parts do explicitly require a CARB EO in order to be legal in Colorado. So that is coming along. Now, again, with so one other thing to kind of bear in mind here is that California can historically set their own standards for emissions. Now, what we found with the NC, and I believe this is true of a lot of other cars, is that they're basically a generation ahead. So the EPA said, this car needs to be this clean, and CARB said, well, the next standard is up here, so this car needs to be this clean. And Mazda and different manufacturers can approach that in two different ways. So for example, with Mazda, with the 99 to 2000 Miata, they made a California-specific version that has 2 catalytic converters, whereas every other state got a different version with a better header that only has 1 cat. However, for the NC, they just said, one model, they're all certified to California standards, and therefore they are also satisfied to the EPA standards, which are not quite as tight as the California standards. And the California standards are less the California standards and more just a generation ahead, if you will. So all of that said, how do you do it? Well, the first thing is you have to build a kit that does not increase the emissions of the car to start off with. And that is a lot easier said than done. You want horsepower? Sweet. Throw some boost at it, make sure it doesn't blow up, you're good to go. If you want to make it clean, then you have to do a lot of the detail stuff, a lot of the stuff that as a customer you're never going to see or feel or know, but is going to affect how clean the car is. And there's a lot of iteration in, a lot of iteration in there where you test it, you make a change, you say, okay, we improved this, but now this came up. So now let's make this kind of change and see what happened. Okay, they all came down, but then this other one came up in terms of specific emissions, NOx or carbon monoxide or whatever. So there's a lot of back and forth with that. There's also physical things. One of the things that we really struggled with the NC turbo kit is, so we did this goofy outlet so that we could keep the stock catalytic converter where it was to start off with. So that was good. We still have 2 cats. Deleting a cat is a big no-no, so that's going to make it illegal in any state because you're defeating an emissions device. But what we've done, if you can kind of imagine the stock setup, you just have some sheet metal tubes that dump into the cat. With a turbo, you have a big cast iron manifold, you've got the cast iron turbine housing, and then in this case, you have the cast iron outlet. And all that stuff is going to absorb heat out of the exhaust, including simply the restriction of the turbo and spinning the turbine. So that's all going to absorb energy out of the exhaust, which means there's that much less energy to get to the catalytic converter. And lighting the catalytic converter, because the catalytic converter needs to get to a certain temperature before it starts catalyzing things and cleaning up your emissions. So it does nothing until it's hot enough, and getting that hot enough as quickly as possible is crucial and is difficult with all of this in place. So that was a lot of the stuff that we had to do before we take the car to CARB. So once we do that, we have a high degree of confidence that, okay, our kit is clean, we've done our testing, we've done our due diligence, we're going to take it to CARB and say we're ready to go. So how that process works is that theoretically, particularly with an older car like this, you want to take, and this is actually the car that we took to SEMA, which is does have an approved emissions laboratory that CARB accepts the results from. But regardless, we sent this car in totally stock trim down to SEMA. They tested it, they baselined it so that we knew that the car was good to go to start off with. Now, the tests that they're doing, which I'll get into in a minute, but the tests that they're doing are wildly, wildly more comprehensive than what the emissions tests that you do to get your registration renewed. These are OE level tests. They simulate different driving conditions and that kind of thing. So I'll go through that in a second. But so we did that to make sure that this car was clean and didn't have any underlying problems that we were unaware of. And then they installed the turbo kit on there, made sure that all the parts were as described in the instructions. And this is actually, I skipped a step. This is after submitting a wild amount of paperwork just to get this started. We had to submit technical drawings, calibration tables, instructions, fairly comprehensive explanation of what it was and what it did and what it didn't do, and all of that kind of stuff. So, so we've got the car at SEMA, their emissions lab. The kit is now installed. Now it needs to be tested. So we have to go through all those tests again. And the tests are going to vary based on exactly what it is. For example, our Randall intake kit, that also has an EO, an executive order, so it's legal everywhere. The most recent EO we had to get for the Randall was simply because of the material change. So the original Randall was made out of carbon fiber, the new one is made out of silicone. You wouldn't think that would require paperwork, but turns out it does. But that is what they call an engineering evaluation. So we basically submit a very simple form that says, this is the EO that it was under originally, this is what we changed, we would like a new EO without any testing because this doesn't make any difference to the emissions. So they, after it got through their backlog, so it can take a little while, but they basically read it, say, yep, that makes sense to me. They rewrote the EO, they gave us a new number, and there we go. So that was reasonably easy, partially because the EO already existed, we were just updating it, and partially because it really was a very simple change. It was just a material change that made no difference to the functionality of the part. Why we had to do that in the first place is a different question. Now that said, on a turbo kit, that's a whole different can of worms. With a turbo kit, you're affecting almost everything emissions-wise, and you can really make your car quite a bit dirtier pretty easily if you don't go through all the testing and make sure that everything's good. So for this car, we had to do, or for this kit I should say, we had to do 3 different tests. So we did the FTP 75, and that is a cold start, so that's going to get into the cat light off that I was talking about. And it's light acceleration, cruise, idle, and then a hot restart. So it's it's not real tough on the car. It's not, a dyno run, but there's a very, very specific speed trace that the dyno operator has to follow. all the emissions are gathered and analyzed, and it has to meet, again, all the standards that this car was certified to originally. So there's also the US 06, which is basically just a more aggressive acceleration version. The speeds are a little bit higher, there's quicker acceleration, and we're not talking about a full throttle drag pull, but quicker acceleration. There are more rapid and abrupt speed changes and that kind of thing. And then there's also the SC03, which is pretty similar to an FTP 75. It's just a lot shorter, but with air conditioning to make sure that that additional load doesn't cause additional emissions. And again, you're still within those standards. Now, if you're playing with the fuel system in a kind of comprehensive way beyond just the fuel injectors that we replaced, and this is probably the most common one, if your car stock has a hydrocarbon trap in the intake and you are manipulating that in some way, then you also have to do evaporative emissions tests to make sure that the car, just when it's sitting, isn't off-gassing gasoline and increasing emissions even when the engine is off. So there are a lot of layers in there for sure. So once you do those tests and everything is good to go, and your results are acceptable, then you send them off to CARB. Now, if your results are really close to the threshold, CARB can say, I'm not sure that I trust you. We need confirmatory testing, so send the car over to us and we're going to test it ourselves. Or they'll say, hopefully, yep, you're good to go. There's enough of a buffer there, so we're not concerned about anything, and your results are accepted formally, which means that you're good to go. Now we just need to do the paperwork. So once your results are accepted, you are just in the waiting game. Basically, you submit your results, you wait for them to be accepted. Once they're accepted, that is a huge weight off your chest. Ask me how I know. And then you wait more for the actual official legal paperwork to say, yes, this is legal to sell in California and everywhere else. You're good to go. So that is a quick run through of the process. So I've got some questions here. I'm going to go through that stuff. If you have questions, I'm getting some flailing about in the background, so we can go to those questions first. But if you have more questions, do drop them in, and we will try to get to them. Yes?
So you talked a lot about how CARB does the testing, and how do we know that throughout our design and testing that it's clean enough to submit to CARB?
Good question. So how do we know throughout our testing, before it ever goes to CARB or SEMA, whether it is clean enough to pass? So we do that in our case, we work with Greg Banish out of Calibrated Success. So he has a mini PEMS, which is a mini portable emissions monitoring system, I think. So basically, the short version is it's a miniature test cell that's going to be 80% accuracy or whatever. It's very accurate, but not 100%. So that's going to tell us whether the car is clean, where the car is dirty, what conditions we need to manipulate things to make sure that it is fully clean. We can also go to an official emissions laboratory and get it tested 100% officially, completely separate of the approval process. It's just testing it on our own ahead of time. That is not inexpensive. So we would love to avoid it, which is why we do the mini PEMS, which is an 80% confidence. And if the 80% confidence suggests that we should be good with a pretty good grace, sweet, let's just send it, as the kids say. If we're borderline and we want to make sure that we're good, then we're going to send it to a lab and make sure that we are actually 100% to start off with. More questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it possible to have a CARB-approved air oil separator, and when will we offer one?
Good question. Is it possible to have a CARB-approved air oil separator or catch can, and when will we have one? Big asterisk on the second one. So is it possible? Yes. It has to drain to the oil pan, which I personally am not a fan of, but I understand their logic. It has to be sealed, which I am a fan of, and it has to be tested and approved. And the tested and approved part is where it kind of gets into a struggle, and that's where, unfortunately, the business end of things come into play, because these are not cheap. The testing is pretty expensive, and then by the time you factor in all the man hours, all the shipping cars back and forth, all of the everything that's involved there, it gets to be a lot. And there has to be a business case to warrant that investment to get it back out on the back end. So will we do it? Maybe. Frankly, I'd love to. I think catch cans are glorious and should be on every car. But we got to make sure that we're doing it in an intelligent way that makes sense and makes it so that it is still a viable product for us.
Next one, speaking of profitability, do you think it was worth our time to focus on CARB legal stuff versus what we were doing before that was a little more Wild West?
So do I think it was worth our time to focus on CARB versus basically everything we're doing technically isn't, and this wasn't necessarily true for us, but generally speaking, everything we're doing is not legal and technically cannot be used on a street car? Yeah, I think it is. For one, strictly from a business standpoint, California is a huge market. There are a lot of you Californians out there, probably a lot of you watching right now, and we want to make sure that we can take care of you and take care of you without a lot of, yeah, it'll work great, but make sure that you don't actually let an inspector see this, or make sure you hide this, or be sure to leave your MAF installed even though you're not actually using it, because that way the cop that pulls you over might not notice this, or a bunch of like the funny business there. You don't have to worry about it. There are more and more rules or people being caught basically for selling cars that are not emissions compliant. Basically, if you're going to sell a car into California that has a standalone ECU or a deleted cat on it or something like that, nope, that whole market is off limits to you. So do I think it was worth it? Yes. Am I sad that we lost some of the things that we did? Also, yes. But I do think it was worth doing. Yes?
Why can't we just advertise for off-road use only?
Why can't we advertise for off-road use only? You don't have to be a lawyer to see straight through that argument. Now, if that said, if the kit is sold incomplete, if the kit is sold with, I will sell it to you after you give me the VIN and a picture of the race car that it's going on, that kind of thing, which is a little overly complicated on the second one, then yes, that can make it legal. Again, if it's an incomplete kit and you have to use parts that are going to make it illegal technically on the street to do it, then that is basically implying, certainly as far as we're concerned, that it is not going on a street car and it is for an off-road track car only. But saying, here's a turbo kit that's 100% complete and deletes a catalytic converter and is only for off-road use only, no. If anyone governmentally actually sees that, you're going to get in a lot of trouble, and there have been very, very, very big fines for similar kinds of things. That's it? Okay, so I do have a pretty big list here, so if you have questions, you got plenty of time, drop them in the comments. We'll get to them after this. So going through the list here, will there eventually be CARB legal parts for 2024 cars? Yes, we have a big old pile of them. So one of the things to bear in mind is that CARB only matters for things that affect the emissions of the car. So suspension doesn't have anything to do with emissions. Brakes, electronics, interior stuff, lights, all that does not have anything to do with the emissions of the car, and CARB does not care. One other part that you may not realize is that CARB does not care about exhaust. Big ol' asterisk, has to be behind the catalytic converter. If it includes a cat, they very much care. And it can't be over I can't remember it right now, but it can't be over a specific decibel threshold. So with those two things in mind, you don't have to have your exhaust CARB approved. All of our exhausts that do not include cats are legal in California because of that reason. How many carbs should I eat a day? Good question. If you are keto, very few. If you are like the rest of us and like delicious food, and I say that having done both sides of the equation, then all of them, and you will be happy, but perhaps shorter lived. Okay, What is the most challenging part of getting a turbo kit system approved by CARB? I kind of talked about this before, so just briefly, getting the calibration so that it is clean enough and all the detail stuff, the transient fueling, the cold start fueling, the hot restart fueling, all that stuff, making sure that that is good enough to pass the standards was difficult for sure. And getting that cat to light off. Both of those things definitely made life pretty difficult. Okay, have you had to shelve any projects because you just weren't able to get it CARB certified? So if the question is, have we sent a part to CARB, a kit to CARB, and then we were not ultimately able to get that certification, the answer is no. Everything we've sent to CARB, we have been able to get certified. That said, there are some projects that we just didn't start, or some existing products that we stopped selling because we knew it was just flat not possible, either not possible to get them CARB approved, or we would never get our money back on it. You know, we could do this and it would be great and wonderful, and we would sell 2 and we'd lose 10 grand on each one, kind of thing. So that, 2 different ways to answer that question, I suppose. Okay, are there products on your wish list that you'd like to do but don't because CARB certification would be difficult or impossible? Kind of the same answer there. There are definitely a handful from the business standpoint. I'd really like to do it, but from a business standpoint, it just doesn't make sense. Basically, standalone ECUs, to be specific, is a good one. Standalones are awesome. I love standalones. They give you a lot of power and flexibility, literally and figuratively, in what you're doing with the car, but a standalone is never going to be emissions legal. There's 2 reasons for that. One, if it's an OBD2 car, you have to go through all of the OBD2 testing to prove that all of your fault codes and everything still works, and that is a gigantic undertaking. So, for example, in the NC, we're not using a standalone, partially because it's mostly pointless because the stock ECU is very powerful and we can adjust it to our needs, but also because by using the stock ECU, that means that all that OBD2 fault checking and all that's already in there, we're not touching. So that is good to go. We don't have to reprove anything because Mazda already proved it. The other big advantage is that we only change what we need to change in the ECU. Everything that doesn't need to be changed is left just as Mazda intended it. So drivability, emissions, all that kind of stuff is, we've got a huge head start by starting there rather than trying to build all that from the very beginning. And adjustability. I kind of touched on this earlier, but if it's something that is adjustable, particularly like the ECU and all the bazillion parameters that are in there, a standalone is adjustable, kind of by nature. So I put together a calibration that's clean, everything works great, but it's adjustable, so I get that calibration approved, and then you go in and say, I want to do this, and you change something, now it's illegal. And there's no way to control that, so adjustable means not legal. For example, when on our NA and NB turbo kits, the Voodoo box used to be adjustable. When we went through the CARB certification process with that, we dialed in, we basically just kind of initially had a range of things in there and you can set it up to exactly what you need. When we went through the CARB certification process, we went back, we looked at the Voodoo box, we dialed in the right adjustments, and there were only 2, but the right adjustments for all cars, and nailed that down so that now that is no longer adjustable, and then it's okay. Because you can modify fueling and timing and all that kind of stuff as long as you prove that it's still clean. Okay, yeah, this is kind of getting a little redundant, but I will touch on it briefly. What are the benefits of paying attention to CARB rules? Clean air. But legal, there's no kind of repercussions, whether it's current or future. You don't have any financial liability, and your resale is much more open. Why don't more aftermarket companies seek CARB approval? Well, you'd have to ask them, but if I were to guess, it's because it's expensive, it's complicated, and it's difficult. That does not mean that it's insurmountable, but that does mean that it is expensive. You've got to find a car. You've got to do the development to get everything clean in the first place. You've got to pay not ridiculous, but not cheap fees for all of the testing. If there are any problems, you have to address those problems, or all that money is down the drain. And there are just a lot of steps to it. And that's part of why we use SEMA as a broker, or as a consultant, I suppose I should say, for the CARB process. So SEMA knows what's going on. They understand the process. They have experts that is their job, and they have an emissions laboratory in place, or on site, I should say, their own. So they can do everything for us. They also work very closely with CARB constantly, so they have contacts, they know how it works, all that kind of stuff. But if we were going to try to do it ourselves, it would be possible, technically, and we would have to hire people to do only that, and it would be much more, even more complicated and expensive. So here's a pretty popular question. If I don't live in California, why should I care and be punished because some other state has rules I don't have to follow? You're not being punished, and you do have to follow those rules. So California is the one that has the structure in place to get the parts approved. But if you're doing a standalone ECU and putting your own fueling table together, and it's a street car with a license plate, that's not legal. It doesn't matter where you are. If you're within the U.S., it is not legal to do that. If you are removing a cat, anything like that. And again, everything I talked about before, resale, any kind of legal stuff. And maybe you don't have inspections now, but you will. And now you can't use that car anymore because that car is no longer legal. Never was legal, but now people know about it. So that. Okay. Will NC 2.5 cars using your turbo be emissions legal? Technically speaking, no, because you cannot use our calibration on a 2.5 engine. So if you're not using our calibration, which was specifically tested and approved, it is not legal on a 2.5. And again, our 2.0 calibration is not safe for a 2.5 engine. So, no. Yes?
Along similar lines, if I have stage 1 turbo kit and I swapped in a slightly different engine or put on a different intake manifold or some other related part, does that void my CARB EO for the turbo kit?
Okay, so to simplify a little bit, I have kit A that is EO certified, we'll say our stage 1 turbo kit, and I add this other part. Is my car legal or illegal? Depends. If both of those parts have EOs, you're good to go, no worries. But if you use our EO turbo kit with a non-EO intake manifold, no, your car is now not legal. And basically, it makes sense if you think about it. Just because you have one EO'd product doesn't therefore mean that you can do anything you want otherwise to the rest of the car and still have it legal. So, no. That said, you can stack EOs. So that part has an EO, that part has an EO, that part has an EO, no worries. You're good to go because everything that you've modified emissions-wise on the car has an EO, so you're good, you're safe. Okay, and is it possible to get a one-off custom car to get a CARB exemption? So I'm assuming that this is not really from a we're building a kit standpoint, but from a I have a car and I want to make it CARB legal, my one car. I don't care about my buddy doing the same thing. I don't care about building a kit to sell, to have people do the same thing. I just want my car legal. Yes, there is a big asterisk on that. You have to follow all the rules. For example, if you're doing an engine swap, you have to bring all of the emissions components and qualifier, because I'm a little fuzzy on this, but my understanding is you have to bring all of the emissions components from that donor vehicle over to your car, and then you have to take that car to a referee who's going to look at it, who's going to examine it. It's not going to be subjected to the same tests as we are, but it is going to be examined, inspected much more closely than just going in for a tailpipe test. So if you satisfy all of those rules, then you will get a sticker that says this car is legal. You know, for example, there's a customer that put a V8 in an NA or an NB, and wanted it legal in California. So that customer put basically that entire Camaro, emissions-wise, so that includes the ECU, that includes the headers, that includes the cats, all of that. They put that entire car within their Miata, and then they didn't have an EO for that, but they did follow the rules. So they went to an inspector or a referee. The referee said, yep, check, 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 check. Okay, here's your sticker. Your car is legal. Kind of along those lines, we built a car a while ago with a V8 that had an EO for that engine in a pre-OBD2 car, whatever it was. So technically, that customer did not need, because his car was pre-OBD2, we followed all the rules, we're good to go. Technically, that customer did not need to go to a referee because everything in that car had an EO to start off with. That said, oddly, you pop the hood on your Miata that definitely did not come with a V8, and your just kind of normal inspector sees a V8, their head's going to explode. They're going to assume that that sticker is made up, and they're going to reject you right off. So he went to a referee just to get the fancy sticker to say, no, for real, this is legal, and then he was good to go. So, okay. Do we have more questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you as always for stopping by. I hope this was informative. It is not an easy thing. It's not a cheap thing, but it is a thing that we feel is important and really helps out our customers and us from liability, from sellability, from safety, and from clean air, all that fun stuff. So again, now's the time. If you did like this video, drop us a like, let us know. If you want to see more like it, subscribe. And if you have similar experiences, different experiences, whatever, drop them in the comments. Let us know. We're definitely interested to hear what you have to say. And if you have ideas for different videos in the future that we just have to do, drop those in the comments as well. We'll put them on the list and we will try to get to them in the future. In the meantime, we will see everyone next week.